Target, Baghdad. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. Let me start tonight with the threat to Baghdad and to the entire American investment of lives and treasure in that country. The thousands of our troops who have died, the many more who have been horribly wounded, the tens of thousands of Iraqis who died in a war we began in 2003. A question now for my fellow citizens of this country. What's the difference between the Iraq we entered 11 years ago and the Iraq of the future that now looms? Saddam Hussein led a Sunni-dominated Iraq. We went in there and installed a Shia-dominated country. Now the Sunnis are fighting their way back to power. Why wouldn't they? Wouldn't we, if we were them? Was there any reason to believe that Iraq, once we left, would not revert back to what it was before? That the people who held power before would not try to get it back? It gets worse. Was there any reason to believe that in putting a Shiite government into power in Iraq that we were not creating an ally for Shiite-dominated Iran, an ally that Iran is now in the process of defending, having sent in already the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to ward off the attack on Baghdad by the Sunni-dominated insurgents? Finally, why did someone think it was in the interest of our country to shift power in Iraq from Sunni to Shia, from Iraq as a counterweight to Iran to Iraq as an ally of Iran? Who was that genius? And if George W. Bush was so out of it to embark on this American excursion into insanity in the first place, why is President Obama or anyone else, knowing now that we've achieved through all these sacrifices nothing, talking about doubling down on it with still more U.S. military engagement in turbulent Mesopotamia? Senator Joe Manchin is senator from West Virginia, and one Washington Post reporter, by the way, tweeted, quote, "Iraq is basically falling apart. Today, Sunni militants already in control of parts of the country vowed to march on Baghdad. On Tuesday, the insurgents took over the northern city of Mosul. Yesterday, took over control of Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown. Well, today, according to the Associated Press, they attacked an Iraqi security checkpoint just 31 miles north of Baghdad. According to the Wall Street Journal now, Iran's Revolutionary Guard forces are now assisting the Iraqi army to try to regain control of Tikrit. The White House said they are not considering sending troops back to Iraq, but the president said he wouldn't rule out anything else.
What we've seen over the last couple of days indicates the degree to which Iraq's going to need more help. It's going to need more help from us, and it's going to need more help from the international community. So my team is working around the clock to identify how we can provide the most effective assistance to them. I don't rule out anything because we do have a stake in making sure that these jihadists are not getting a permanent foothold in either Iraq or Syria, for that matter.
Meanwhile, Speaker John Boehner blamed the president for what's happening in Iraq. Let's watch him.
It's not like we haven't seen over the last 5 or 6 months these terrorists moving in, taking control of western Iraq. Now they've taken control of Mosul. They're 100 miles from Baghdad. And what's the president doing? Taking a nap.
Senator Manchin, the president's taking a nap, so we're back to political gaming this whole thing. My question to you is, when we look at the situation over there, as I've just said, the Sunnis were in power. We knocked them out of power, put the Shias in power. The Sunnis are trying to get back into power. The Shias are now going for help with Iran. They brought in the Iranian National Guard and the Revolutionary Guard in to help them. How did we get in the middle of a civil war between Sunni and Shia that's been going on for 1,000 years? It's going to go on for another 1,000 years. And we got involved in taking sides. I don't get it.
Well, a lot of people don't get it, Chris, and that's been predicted for quite some time. I've often said this: if money or military might would change that part of the world, we'd have done it by now. And to bring us back into this, I don't think anything will come out of it. And how long do you want us to stay? I know I have my fellow colleagues, some of them who think that we should have still had a presence. We should have stayed in perpetuity. I don't buy into that. I don't agree with that. Now, what do we do now? Can we help? We've got to see if they have the will to defend their country. Do they have the will to defend themselves? Are they willing to fight for it? We've got an awful lot invested in that country, and the sacrifices that our men and women and our soldiers and families have made is beyond compared to anything else anybody else has done, not counting the resources we put there. Now we're finding out that they've taken our equipment, our supplies, our weapons, and now moving into Syria to re-engage in that fight and use them against us, I'm sure. And And someone said, well, what should we do? They've suggested maybe airstrikes. That's something I think would be more receptive if we think that we can get the rest of the United Nations involved with us to try to help them defend themselves. But they've got to show the will to fight. And I don't think, Chris, there's any. I haven't detected any type of support to put troops on the ground again back in Iraq.
Well, you did use the term country, and you say defend their country. I mean, you're using American terminology. We both grew up with it. It's nation against nation, but it isn't exactly that. It's the Shia in power that we put in power against the Sunnis that had power, who are now supporting those trying to retake it for the Sunnis. So how do we say who's the patriot here, by even using our lingo of patriotism? How does it fit in that kind of a context? Well, that's why I wonder what we're doing shooting on either side at this point. I don't know. Yeah. I've been against this from the beginning. I don't like to say I told you so, because Senator McCain can say I told you so. Sure, if we stay there with 100,000 troops for 100 years, we'll always be there with 100,000 troops. But, you know, McCain and the others who I respect, aren't they talking about maybe 5,000 troops? And would that stop and overthrow that government? Do we have any reason to believe that? A small contingent of U.S. forces who are not in combat somehow stopping these people, insurgents, now from winning?
If we haven't been able to train them and give them the skills and the equipment to defend themselves now, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether it be Shiite, Sunnis, wherever we are, we've already made our bed. And if that's where we are, and we're going to basically try to see if they can hold on to what little bit of a country or a regime that they have, I don't believe putting 5,000 troops on the ground will ever get 5,000 troops out. I think it'll be in perpetuity, and I am not for that. Chris, I don't believe that we can change that hatred between these sects. I just don't believe that can be done. So with that being said, can we help them gain control? How can they have a unified government to where they can all work together in some form of a democracy?
They don't want one.
And they don't want one.
Maliki doesn't want Sunnis in his government. Last question. How dire is it, based upon the briefing you got from the administration in Baghdad? Are they worried Baghdad might be taken?
Well, basically, they think oh my goodness, it surely could. Whoever thought that they would move this quick and this fast? Whoever thought that 4 regiments would completely give up and not even fight? This was caught everybody by surprise. We asked that question. That was a surprise to everybody. Well, if that was a surprise, what makes you think they can defend Baghdad? Now, we have forces in Baghdad, basically, that's protecting some of our people there, and we've got to make sure that they are able to be safe, and if not, get them out of there if it's going to fall inevitably, or if we're going to be able to defend and help them strengthen themselves to defend that area. And then we're going to divide the country. Is it going to be split up? Half of it going to Syria, half of it going to Iran? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, Senator, as you know, our business, the media, hasn't been able to predict what's going to happen in Richmond, let alone what's going to happen in Baghdad. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. You're a serious man. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Thanks, Chris.
Joining us right now is U.S. Congressman Jim Moran of Virginia, and David Corn, Washington Bureau Chief of Mother Jones and an MSNBC analyst. I want to start with Congressman Moran. You have been a critic of this enterprise of going in there. 186,000 people have died in that war in Iraq, and yet here we are headed towards, it looks to me, back to the future. The future looks a lot like the past. The Sunnis want power again. The soldiers are taking off their uniforms. And by the way, Congressman, there was an ad today, ironically or tragically, in the Washington Post, full-page ad for Humvees, Lockheed Martin. They're selling that Humvee right there. And then we're getting a tweet today of a Humvee in the control of the insurgents. There it is. We paid for the Humvee. We gave it to that government over there, so-called. Now it's in the hands of the insurgents because all the guys took off their uniforms, turned over the keys to the cars, including the Humvees, and ran. Because I don't know why, maybe they don't know why they were in uniform to begin with, except the weekly pay. Your thoughts about this talk of us somehow losing a war in Iraq, which we should have never been in?
Well, first of all, the Iraq security forces are primarily Shia, and they weren't willing to defend a Sunni community, Mosul or any of the others in Sunni territory. The problem is that we have a government in there that doesn't have the trust or confidence of the Iraqi people for good cause. In fact, this guy could become another Saddam Hussein without the charm, if you can believe it. But you're absolutely right. You've been right on target for 14 years, Chris. $2 trillion later, 4,500 American lives, well over 100,000 Iraqi deaths, and we could be in far worse shape than we've ever been in terms of our own security, because these guys, ISIS, they have international ambitions. They're bringing in people from other countries. These are international terrorists. Al-Qaeda kicked them out because they were so vicious. They're psychotic. psychotic almost in their desire to kill. And unfortunately, that killing spree is recruiting a whole lot of people, even from Europe, even from North America. This situation cannot be overstated, and it's far worse, really, as a security threat to us than it was under Saddam. But I do think that the Shia forces are going to be able to defend Baghdad. Understand that there's only 3,000 to 5,000 of these ISIS troops. They're vicious, they're intimidating, but we've got far more troops.
Okay.
We've spent $14 billion in training and equipping them.
Congressman, hold on there. I want you to stay a bit longer. David Corn has been following this, and I think has been right on this from the beginning. You know, the irony is that the United States Senate and other people in the Congress have voted to declare the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to be a terrorist organization. Right. Now, potentially, we're on their same side because they're in there defending the Baghdad government, their fellow Shia. This is so weird.
You have people like John Boehner and Lindsey Graham and John McCain today all saying we should do something, not boots on the ground, but airstrikes or something else, get more military equipment to the Shia military that isn't fighting. And what's going to happen? They're going to be fighting right alongside the Revolutionary Guard, the Quds, and everybody else. So we're going to give them equipment. Where do you think that equipment's going to go? Already there are reports that ISIS, the beyond al-Qaeda extremist, got equipment from what the CIA was trying to give out to moderate rebels in opposition in Syria. So the question, this is not the problem. They have so many more troops, the government's military in Iraq, than the jihadis, and the question is not training them. It's not giving them more equipment. It's what they're fighting for, what they're willing to fight for. And if 30,000 Iraqi, military folks can't defend the city of Mosul against 800. Yeah. I mean, what can you do at that point?
I always wonder whether they saw themselves as a true country or not, or simply the Sunnis and the Shia fighting a revolution or a civil war that's going on for, as I said, 1,000 years. Anyway, today Senator John McCain, who you mentioned as a hawk, blasted President Obama's Iraq policy and said he'd fire his entire national security team. Let's watch Senator McCain.
Now, if I sound angry, it's because I am angry. To declare that a conflict is over does not mean that it necessarily is over. We see this all now torn asunder because of a policy of withdrawal without victory. And when those withdrawals and that policy was being orchestrated, the senator from South Carolina and I and others stood up and said, please don't do this. Please leave a small force behind in Iraq.
You know, Congressman Moran, I hate to say this because I do respect, who doesn't, John McCain's service to this country and what he went through as a POW. But the reason we lost Vietnam was we were eventually going to come home. And if we came home, the North Vietnamese were going to be there, the Viet Cong were going to be there, and they were going to be there forever because that's where they belong. And we were coming home. So sooner or later, they're going to have their way. Nobody thought that through. McNamara, the geniuses, the best and the brightest. Here we are, and John McCain, again, I respect him, but here he is wanting to repeat the same argument, that we should stay forever. Just keep on till when? And then whenever that is, a year later, a year after 2014, a year after 2020, whenever that year after is, we're gone and they're back in power. Why does he think the longer you stay, you don't have to leave eventually? I don't get it. It's a weird kind of argument he makes.
Yeah, I read his speech, but Korea is I think, a different case in point. He does cite Korea, but with all of these countries, as they say, we have the watches, but they have the time. They're going to outlast us, and the attrition of our troops through IEDs and the cost, of course, financially. This is a democracy. We're going to pull people out. But, Chris, this is a very serious situation. They're now, this ISIS group is now the wealthiest terrorist organization in the world. They looted the Mosul banks for $430 million, in addition to taking about 200 catches of U.S. military equipment. So I don't think they can get into Baghdad. But with regard to John, Senator McCain, he backed going into Iraq in the first place. Bush 41 did not. It was Bush 43 at a very different approach to this. Bush 41 said, don't go into Baghdad, leave Saddam there, because as bad as he is, he's probably better than the alternative. And it turns out Bush 41 knew what he was doing. Bush 43, unfortunately, didn't. And unfortunately, to some extent, Senator McCain may not have known what he was doing when he pushed us to get into Iraq in the first place.
Well said. Let me ask that, David, quickly.
Well, you remember when Paul Wolfowitz testified before the Iraq War, he said it's not going to be a problem. There's no history of ethnic strife in this country. It's all going to work out well. I mean, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know the region. They didn't care. And there's no way that we're going to be able to send in airstrikes or limited amounts of military supplies that's going to change the general political dynamic. If you don't address that, nothing else will matter.
As I said a few moments ago, if we can't figure out Richmond, we can't figure out Baghdad. Anyway, thank you, gentlemen. Jim Rand may disagree because he probably figured out Richmond anyway. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, David Corn. Coming